Welcome to church. Thank you guys so much for clicking on the video. This is going to be a multi-part series in the book of Daniel, all about how we can better respond to this crazy world that we're living in today. If you have any questions, comments, or concerned about any of the material covered in this video, please do me a favor, leave it in the comments. If I don't respond to you directly, maybe I'll make a video in the future responding directly to people's questions and things they have to say in the comments. Okay? I hope you enjoy. So I'm gonna give you the answer now, the beginning of the message. So if you don't hear anything else, if you don't make it through the end of the video, I'm gonna give you the answer to the test, to the whole point I'm trying to make. How are you gonna make it through 2020? How are you gonna respond better to 2020? Not even 2020, 2020 and beyond. With Jesus. Jesus is how you make it through 2020. This is what Daniel's trying to tell people. This is what Daniel's still trying to tell us thousands of years later. This is what Daniel tried his very best to tell Nebuchadnezzar. And the thing about it is it's hard. It's hard to get it. It's not hard to believe in God. It's not hard to believe in God. It's not, for most people, it's not really hard to convince someone that there is God out there. That's not what's difficult. What's difficult is believing that Jesus is Lord. Because if Jesus is Lord, that means you're not. Because if Jesus is Lord, that means other things are not. That means that not everything is true. And that means you got to make a choice. Nebuchadnezzar didn't get it. In the face of the impossible, when Daniel was able to perform the impossible task that Nebuchadnezzar put on his wise men, Nebuchadnezzar still didn't get it. He bowed down and worshiped Daniel. And it didn't matter how well Daniel worded it. Daniel, before he even told the king the interpretation, he told him where he got the answer. And he's been pointing this entire book towards Jesus. Because you could see all the miracles and the signs and the wonders. But then you can hear what other people say, what most people say. Oh, Jesus was he was a teacher. He was a good teacher. I believe he was a good teacher. He was a good prophet. He was a good man. He did good things. But do you believe he is your Lord? Do you believe that what he says is true? When he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. That's the hard part. And that's where most of us get stuck. And so then it becomes my job as a communicator of the gospel, as a minister, as a teacher, as a whatever you want to label me as. It becomes my job and the job of others who have the same calling to convince you to give your life to Jesus. So it's my job to show you not that there is a God, not that God is real, not to sit and endlessly explain signs and wonders that are already written down for us. No, it's my job to convince you that for all other teachings, all other gods, all other religions, all other beliefs, all the science, all the explanation, all of your own ego. It's my job to convince you that Jesus is Lord over all that. And so the best way I know how is to show you exactly what separates Jesus from all other beliefs, all other teachings, all other religions. And show you what Jesus is willing to do for you. And luckily we have the account of Daniel to go by. I'm going to be jumping around scriptures a lot in this one. So if you're a note taker, take some notes. I do try to make sure when I do these, to make sure that I have all the text visible, all the different scriptures that I'm using labeled, so you guys can go read it for yourselves. And for anybody that wants to follow along. And so I want to start today's message talking about Jesus, talking about the one Daniel's trying to point us to. This is in Colossians 10. This is verse 15. This is the definition and explanation of Jesus that we have from the Apostle Paul. And Paul writes in verse 15, He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For everything was created by Him in heaven and on earth, the visible and the invisible, whether thrones or dominions, rulers or authorities, all things have been created through Him and for Him. He is before all things, and by Him all things hold together. He is also the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that He might come to have first place in everything. For God was pleased to have all His fullness dwell in Him, and through Him to reconcile everything to Himself, by making peace through the blood of His cross, whether things on earth or things in heaven. John 6, verse 60. Caption of this one, I think, tells the story. Many disciples desert Jesus. Verse 60, therefore, when many of His disciples heard this, they said, this teaching is hard. Who can accept it? And in this passage in John, literally the language of the Bible describes when Jesus went from having thousands of followers to only 12 because of what He said, because He claimed to be Lord. Because everybody likes rockstar Jesus, everybody likes miracle Jesus, everybody likes the Jesus that does good things for us, the Jesus that heals the sick and cures the blind and feeds the multitudes. Everybody likes Jesus when He's doing magic tricks. But when He declares to be Lord and wants to be Lord for you, that's where we get hung up. And so again, back to my problem. My problem is to convince you. All right, why? Number one question I've got since doing church on the internet, why? All right, I hear all the stuff you believe. Yes, I know God. Yes, there is God. There is God. There is Jesus. Great things. Bible, believe it. Great. Why should I put all my faith into this? Why should I put all my faith into Jesus? Because the cost is high, right? That's your life. Why should I devote my life to Jesus? Let's go back to Daniel. Now keep in mind, This is Daniel chapter 3. We just read Daniel chapter 2. Look, Daniel coming off a high note. Okay? Daniel saving all the wise men of Babylon, saving himself, saving his friends, doing exactly what the king, the impossible task the king thought no one would be able to do. He did it for the glory of God. Nebuchadnezzar gave him prominence, gave him status, put him in charge, him and his friends in charge. Even bowed down and worshiped Daniel on behalf of Daniel's God. And here we are 1 chapter later. Nebuchadnezzar didn't get it. Nebuchadnezzar couldn't get past that problem we keep talking about. Nebuchadnezzar didn't have any problem recognizing and knowing God's prominence and God's power, but he refused to believe that Jesus was Lord. Nebuchadnezzar wanted to be Lord over himself. Just like many of us want to be Lord over ourselves. Daniel chapter 3, verse number 3. Literally, dude, this is the next chapter. Timeline-wise, this is years after the account that we just read in 2. But I just think it's so important just how quickly we go from Nebuchadnezzar on his face to here we go. It's crazy. Verse number 3, King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue. 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. It's a big statue. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to assemble the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to attend the dedication of the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had built up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, all the politicians, and all the rulers of all the provinces, all the people in charge, all the important people, everybody assembled for the dedication of the statue the king had set up. They stood before the statue Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And a herald loudly proclaimed, "People of every nation and language, you are commanded when you hear the sound." Can't find my notes, guys. When you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum. I mean, dude, he had a rock band with him. And every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. Therefore, straightforward here. When all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and every kind of music, people of every nation and language fell down and worshiped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar set up. King Nebuchadnezzar is thinking so highly of himself that he decided one day he needs to make a golden statue 90 feet high and 9 feet wide of himself. And you know what? Nebuchadnezzar wants to be God. He wants to be Lord of all. So all nations and people, literally hundreds of thousands of people, all nations and people, when they hear this ensemble of music, greatest orchestra that the world can conjure, when they hear this music, they need to fall down, they need to worship the sound. They need to worship Nebuchadnezzar, and if they don't, they're going to be thrown into a furnace. So, everybody does just that. We read some of these stories in the Bible, guys, and I do it too. There's this problem that we have. It's a flaw in our thinking. C.S. Lewis calls it chronological snobbery. We believe because of science and because we believe that in evolution, we're taught that in school, right? That everything constantly gets better. Technology always improves. Science always improves. And we believe that we're so much different than people thousands of years ago. All those are ancient people. They didn't know what they were doing. They had ancient technologies. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know it's not the same. It's different now. We forget. We have such short memories, guys. We forget our history. We forget. Just like Nebuchadnezzar forgot one chapter ago. And here he is again. He's literally got all his people worshiping him. So now what are God's people going to do? Verse number 8. Some Chaldeans took this occasion to come forward and maliciously accuse the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. You as king have issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the drum, and every kind of music must fall down and worship the gold statue. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire." There are some Jews you have appointed to manage the province of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel's friends. These men have ignored you, the king. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. Then in a furious rage, Nebuchadnezzar, he's got an anger problem. Most narcissists do. He gave orders to bring in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar asked them, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is it true that you don't serve my gods or worship the gold statue that I have set up?" Now, if you're ready, here's your last chance. He's giving them one more chance. Now, if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the drum, and every kind of music, fall down and worship the statue that I've made. If you do not worship it, you will immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God who can rescue you from my power? Does this sound familiar? King, we're having a problem with this group of people, the Jews. We're having a big problem with God's people, King. And I think what we need to do is we need to throw them in a furnace. Does that sound familiar at all? I have read several books. I had an entire class in college all about the concept of evil in the world and all about the Holocaust. And how in our scientific, educated, moral, relativist, and ambiguous world that we live in, our advanced culture that we live in, philosophers still can't make sense of why in the world the most scientifically advanced civilization, arguably, that we accept as recorded history, the Nazis, the philosophers can't for the life of them figure out why in the world they wanted to throw Jews into a furnace. Because the Bible, guys, is not the story and the history of what happened. It's about what always happens. The same history that played out with Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom played out thousands of years later in World War II. Because all these things going around the scenes that we've already talked about in lessons prior, these principalities, these powers, and things that we don't even see, all trying to keep us from one thing. That's believing in Jesus. And so if you think about it, John 6:60 starts making a whole lot more sense. This is a hard teaching. This teaching is hard. Who can accept it? Who could accept it? And more importantly, why? Here's another point. Where is Daniel? Not once in this entire chapter have we heard mention of Daniel. You remember Daniel, right? Oh. Daniel was the one that saved everybody in chapter 2. Now, Daniel's not here. Where's he at? I don't know. Bible doesn't say. You kind of get the sense, and this is pure speculation, but you kind of get the sense that Nebuchadnezzar wants to keep Daniel around so he can interpret the divine for him. And if Nebuchadnezzar knows he's about to kill off everybody that doesn't worship him, well, he knows Daniel's not going to worship him. Maybe he sent Daniel off to do something. We don't know. Daniel's not here. And so I think the important point to be made is what do you do when things inevitably get worse? When in some cases literally you're faced with the fire and Daniel's not around. What Daniel do you have in your life? This is such a difficult and hard to digest point. I'm guilty of this too. I've got my spiritual mentors. I've got my people that I look up to, my idols. Old pastors, old youth pastors, these people that are just like pillars of faith that I hung on every word they said. And I know I've had people that have done the same to me. And as much as I'd love to be a pillar of faith for absolutely every one of you hearing this message, I got to pull a Daniel on you and point you up. Point you higher than me. Because I may not always be around. I'm not always going to be there to bail you out. I may not be with you in your moment of greatest challenge. Just like his friends would suddenly find themselves without Daniel. And so, dude, what are they going to do? I wonder if they're even looking around. Does anybody see Daniel? This is the part where Daniel shows up. Daniel knows what to do, right? Now, Daniel's not here. So what are they going to do? Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to give you an answer to this question. If the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire. And he can rescue us from the power of you, the king. But even if he does not rescue us, man, what a point. But even if he does not rescue us, we want you as king to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you set up. Man, what faith. What clarity. What peace. In this moment of even greater uncertainty than chapter 2. Looks like Daniel rubbed off on them. Looks like they served the same God Daniel did. And so even though Daniel wasn't there, they knew that somebody was. And I wonder who that someone is. Verse number 19, then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with rage. He's been mad this whole chapter. And the expression of his face changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, these aren't people that Nebuchadnezzar hasn't interacted with before, okay? Nebuchadnezzar didn't just promote Daniel. He promoted all these guys. Nebuchadnezzar knows these guys. Put them in charge for a reason. He gave orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than was customary. Verse number 20, and he commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. All right, so we're like past the point of no return. We're way past where we were in chapter 2. Chapter 2, we didn't get to this point. Daniel halted that. Daniel dealt with that situation with tact and discretion. We're way past that. We're literally going into the furnace. So these men in their trousers, robes, head coverings, and other clothes were tied up and thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. And since the king's command was so urgent and the furnace was so extremely hot, the raging flames killed those men who carried Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego up. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell. The Bible just keeps repeating their names for a reason. You remember I told you that Nebuchadnezzar tried to rebrand and change, give these men a new identity. And they fell into the furnace. This furnace is so hot, it killed the people that were throwing them in the furnace. Everybody's suffering for this. Verse number 24. And here it is, boys and girls. The why. Here's the why. Here's the big why that we all ask ourselves. And here's the absolute best way I can describe to you guys what separates Jesus and the words in the Bible from anything else that you can tell me. Verse 24, then King Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in alarm. He said to his advisors, didn't we throw 3 men bound into the fire? Yes, of course, your majesty, they replied to the king. He exclaimed, look, I see 4 men, not tied, walking around in the fire unharmed. And the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Well, you're close, Nebuchadnezzar. It is the Son of God. His name is Jesus. Every other belief you can describe to me. Every other religion, every other belief, every other ideology, every other morality, all the science, everything you could come up to tell me requires you getting somewhere. You reaching enlightenment. You reaching nirvana. You reaching godhood. You yourself, alone, isolated, and with the help of no one else, getting to some insurmountable, impossible peak. Not one other religion or belief system or value system, not one, does the Son of the Most High literally come down and get in a furnace with you. Not one. What makes Jesus different? What sets Jesus apart? What makes him more than a man and makes him indeed Lord over all? Remember what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said? They said, God can deliver us. But even if he does not, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. God might deliver you from your sickness. God might deliver you from your illness. God might deliver you from this crazy world that we live in. But even if he does it, we still believe. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace of the blazing fire and called Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you servants of the Most High God, come out. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. When the satraps, prefects, governors, and the king's advisors gathered around, they saw that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men. Not a hair on their heads was singed. Their robes were unaffected. And there was no smell, not even a smell of fire on them. Nebuchadnezzar exclaimed, praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel and rescued his servants who trusted in him. They violated the king's command and risked their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I issue a decree that any one of the people, nation, or language who says anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be torn limb from limb, and his house made a garbage dump. For there is no other God who is able to deliver like this. And the king rewarded Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. You could read this story 100 times and still not get it. This is one of the most popular stories. This is a story that traditional Christian homes teach their kids. You learn about it in Sunday school. You get a flannel graph. You get pictures. You color it. We learn about this. This is one of the most famous Christian teachings. And you could literally read it hundreds of times and still not get it. And I remember growing up and reading this story and just thinking, who do I want to be in this story? Because to be honest with you, getting thrown in a furnace doesn't seem fun. Yeah, it doesn't seem fun. But the true victim of this story, who do you want to be? You want to be Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or do you want to be Nebuchadnezzar? Nebuchadnezzar, even in the face of another miracle, he still doesn't get it. He still doesn't get it. John chapter 6, verse 61. Jesus, knowing in himself that his disciples were complaining about this, about him being Lord. This is a continuation of the chapter that we read at the beginning, the hard teaching. This is the end of that exchange. After all, thousands of people walked away from Jesus. Jesus, knowing in himself that his disciples were complaining about this, asked him, does this offend you? Then what if you were to observe the Son of Man ascending to where he was before? The Spirit is the one who gives life. Flesh doesn't help at all. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and are life. But there are some among you who don't believe. Verse 67, this is such a sad verse. Therefore Jesus said to the 12, you don't want to go away too, do you? 68, Simon Peter answered, Lord, who will we go to? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and know that you are the Holy One of God. So like Jesus has done his part. He's done all the signs, all the miracles, all the wonders. He's put together this document for you to read. He's literally saved Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego out of a furnace. And explained all the mysteries that Daniel needed to know. But what it all comes down to is, what do you believe? Do you believe that he is the Holy One of God? Do you believe he should be Lord of your life? Or is it just another hard teaching? And so if you really want to ask yourself how to better respond to 2020 and beyond, it's really not about what should you be doing, but it's about who should you be doing it with.